our first speaker, actually planned to write a book on climate change. But after talking to some friends, he got second thoughts. He changed his mind. He's going to tell us why. The book is called On Time and Water, and it's something completely different. Please give a warm hand. I don't see you now, Andri, but I hope you... There you are! Please give a warm hand to the Icelandic writer and poet, Andri Snær Magnason. Andri, here you have time, here you have water. So On Time and Water, 20 minutes from now on.
From now on.
Is yours, and we look so much forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Hello, Mistra. Happy birthday. I'm not going to sing for you. You can sing later. Yes, time and water. So I met a climate scientist. So my background is in poetry, children's books, theater, and I met a climate scientist in Potsdam. And he asked me, why don't you write about climate change? And I said, well, I'm not a scientist, I don't have the measurements, I hardly understand the IPCC reports, and I feel like this is up to the specialists to speak about. They have authority. My father's a doctor, and he really hates it when normal people give medical advice. So, this is your field. But he said, I've been producing data all my life, and people seem not to understand data, but they understand stories. So maybe it's not only that you have authority, maybe you even have a civil duty to write about this issue as a storyteller here and now. So I took this as permission, and I started to look at the data, and I noticed some challenges. One of the first one was when I told my friends I was going to write about climate change, they were all like, oh, here he goes again. And I was thinking how sad it is that my friends didn't feel like it was a subject that I should be working on. And the next time they asked me, I said, I'm writing about time and water. Then they were like, wow, that's interesting. What do you mean? Well, basically in the next 100 years, every single element of water on our planet is simultaneously going out of balance. The glaciers going down, the sea level up, the pH level of the oceans reaching a level not seen for 50 million years, the rain, the frost, the tornadoes, just everything being disrupted simultaneously. And they were like, wow, that's serious. And I said, yes, it is serious. Sometimes it's called climate change. But then the other obstacle was the language. If I tell you a sentence that comes from science, in the year 2100, we expect the pH level of the world oceans to drop from 8.1 to 7.7. And this is the greatest change for 50 million years. So I just said this. Would you have cried if I said 7.5? So in a way, every single word that I said is meaningless. 50 million years is too big. The pH level is too abstract. We can't scale it in our mind. And even 2100 is culturally meaningless because we were raised with the year 2000 as the future. And you probably all agree that 1970 was 30 years ago, and 2100 is after 100 years. So we're in this strange kind of way. It was almost like the issue was like a black hole. You can't really look straight at the black hole. You can't just bring out the data. And to see a black hole, you have to look at the periphery, at the neighboring stars and galaxies. So I thought, okay, to understand the future, I have to go to the past. If I want to talk about science, I need mythology. To be rational, I need poetry. And to be global, I need to be personal. So I was thinking okay, I have to kind of address this from a different angle. So I was thinking about time. I was thinking about the oldest things that I had come across. What does time mean? This manuscript here, the big D there, Deyr fé deyja frændur. It's from the Icelandic manuscript, the Poetic Edda, written around 1200. We can still read it in Icelandic, and I was thinking, can I write something that will be understood after 800 years, in the year 2800? And how has the planet changed more in the previous 100 years of this manuscript than the 700 years before that? And then I was thinking of the time that I could connect to myself personally, because I was so lucky to have all my grandparents until 2006. So I had like 3 grandfathers and 2 grandmothers. So I could have access to the World War, the crisis. I could speak to my grandmother how she remembered how milk was precious when she was poor, and she was sent away from home 8 years old to babysit in another part of Iceland. I could speak to the last person that lived on my grandfather's farm for 1,000 years until they moved to the city. I could talk to my grandmother that wanted to do everything that her brothers were doing because they were doing cool things, and she wanted to do cool things as well. So like the first generation of women that were touching the realm of men. And she actually married my second grandfather, and they went on a glacial honeymoon in the year 1956, which was a pioneering trip to map and research Vatnajökull, which is Europe's biggest glacier. And these were really adventurous trips, and at this time, in 1956, the glacier was in the context of eternity, that it had always been there, and it would probably always be there, and they were the first generation to explore this glacier. And they were stuck in a tent for 3 days, and I asked them, weren't you cold? And they said, cold? We were just married. And then my other grandfather, Björn, he left to New York. He was a doctor, chief surgeon of the New York hospital. And one of his patients was this person here, Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb. So I was really starstruck that I could actually speak to somebody that had known this man and been his doctor, and asked him, was there anything special that you saw? Did you notice anything? Because my childhood was full of nightmares because of his invention. And he said he looked exactly like the image of Christ in my childhood church in Bíldudalur in the Westfjords of Iceland. And I went there and I took a picture. And he wasn't so far off. Both of these guys are actually symbols of time, because I'm born 1,973 years after Christ, but I'm born 28 years after the Trinity explosion. And many geologists, they have suggested that this should mark a new geological era. So this means that not only I'm born in a different time historically as my grandfather, but possibly I'm born into a new geological era than my grandfather. And that means that I'm born into a paradigm shift. And when a paradigm shift happens, then language collapses. And then new explanations come to explain who you are, where you are. And while the paradigm shift is taking place, there is a confusion of language. One example. When Iceland became Christian, we had believed in the Nordic gods. And if you were a poet, there were certain rules to write poetry. You never said sky, you said dwarf's helmet. You never said earth, you said the bride of Odin. Then they become Christian in the year 1000. And how do you write a poem about the new Christ when the language forces you to talk about the creator of the dwarf's helmet and Odin's bride? So you could not explain the new reality without having the whole legacy of the old reality kind of in your luggage. We all know then how Copernicus, it took like 100 years for his theory to be understood, because that was nothing that we could feel in our daily life. We had to trust scientists to tell us that the world was actually different from what our daily observations were telling us. And this took about 100 years to be understood. And we can look at democracy, because I was born with the notion that humans want democracy. Like, we are born to be free, we are born to know that we are equal, we are born to want to be independent, for example, in Iceland. And I was told that for 600 years we wanted to be free from the kings of Norway and Denmark. But in 1809 there was a revolution in Iceland, and this person, Jørgen Jørgensen, he actually gave us freedom. And he was inspired by the French Revolution, and he made this declaration here that Icelanders were free. We would have a parliamentary assembly in the year 1810, and where each person, as well the powerful as the poor, would have an equal share in the government. For us, this seems like we're born to understand this. But in 1809, the French Revolution had not been translated to Icelandic. Nobody had talked about this. Nobody ever mentioned independence until that day. And this was the first day that these ideas were translated into Icelandic, and they just were totally absurd. What do you mean, like the poor should have an equal share as the noble and the church? You know, it's total nonsense. This will never work. So he was mocked, this person, Jörgen Jörgensen. He was called the king of the dog days. So he came to be a not king, to give us freedom, but we called him king because we didn't have a concept of what was being a not king. And constitution, you know, all these, you know, how do you do this? It just didn't make any sense. So the people that understood what he was doing, they were born 1809, and even in 1850, 60, 70, these ideas were still radical, and it wasn't until 1918 that we got independence. And at the same time, women got the right to vote. And of course, everybody here agrees that women are equal to men and have equal ability to govern or do whatever in the world. And so you would think, okay, 50% of the voters are women, so how long does it take for an equal parliament to come out of a 50-50 share of voters? So but still in 1944, my grandmother, she was the first woman to get a pilot license, but you could still see that she was going against the language, because fæddur in Icelandic is a man, but fædd in Icelandic is to be born as a woman. So they had to mark out the ur. Because the language did not expect a woman to want to fly. In 1975, there were only 3 women in the parliament. So there was a women's strike, and 5 years after that, we had Vigdís, our president. And only 100 years later, these were the 3 top contestants of the presidential election, 3 years also after we had the first equal parliament in Iceland. So again, 100 years. So Max Planck said that a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die, and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. So this is a long loop to the conclusion, or what I'm trying to say is that I'm born with kind of this is in Iceland, this is where Reagan and Gorbachev, and it's kind of the symbolic end of the Soviet Union. The house next door is Kaupthing Bank, the 3rd biggest bankruptcy in capitalist history. So not having reached 40, I had already seen 2 huge ideologies kind of crumble, and I was lying in this bush over there, and I was kind of wondering what is next, you know, what comes after this? Because both of these ideologies forgot a very small, minor factor, that they were powered by coal, oil, and gas, and we were living in a very delicate system. And that's why new words come up that did not exist 100 years ago, did not exist even when I was in university, like the word ocean acidification, that is the biggest word in the world, because it's about one of the biggest geological events on the planet for 50 million years. So how can I understand that I'm living in an era where we don't understand? Similar to be in an era where there's no woman in the parliament, or I don't understand that the sun is not going around the planet. So this is the biggest word in the world, and it means that the oceans are changing on one single human being's life. They're not only like all the ancestors of man, if humans are 300,000 years old, all the Homo species, which is 5 million years old, but 10 times the evolution of humanity, acting upon a single life. And again, I can ask somebody, because both my grandparents, or 2 of them, became 98 years old. I could ask them, are 100 years a long time or a short time? And they said 100 years are like this. I feel like I was sailing in the Westfjords last year. I feel like I was traveling the glaciers 2 years ago. So we understand plastic. We understand, like before Copernicus, we understand the tangible world. We can understand plastic in the oceans as a big problem, but we really need scientists and that community to tell us the fact of the really deep change that is happening, that is far more important than possibly some plastic in the oceans. So as in a paradigm shift, you're part of the change or you're hit by the change. And I was in these thoughts when I was invited to interview the Dalai Lama, which came kind of as a strange coincidence. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm Christian. I thought it was a joke. So I said, I'm baptized. I have to ask the Pope for permission. And then they called me the next day and they said, what did the Pope say? And I said, he said, amen. And I was wondering, what do you ask a person that has reincarnated 14 times? You know, it has to be a super intelligent question. And I was thinking of cows, because in India they have all these cows all around. But in Nordic mythology, the world started with humla of prosperity. So in the Nordic religion, the world started with a frozen cow. And it never made any sense to me. It sounded like a whispering game that went wrong. How can the world start with a frozen cow? But if you go to India, they have Kamadhenu, which is this world cow. But the foundations, the leg of this cow, are the Himalayas. And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. They also have a cow. And this cow is something that, the Himla is something that you will not see Marvel Comics make a movie out of. So I was thinking, okay, and if you go to Nepal, you'll find the Great Himalayan Trail ending in the district of Himla. And I was thinking, okay, that's interesting. It's probably a coincidence, but that leads you to Mount Kailash, which is the most sacred mountain in the world. And from that mountain come the 4 major rivers of Asia, the Indus, the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, and of course from the glaciers in that region. And the origin of the Ganga is a glacier that is called Gumuk, and it means the mouth of the cow. And I was like, of course, a frozen cow as a source of life makes perfect sense as a metaphor for a glacier, because a glacier is such a perfect system. It releases the water it keeps the water when it's abundant and harmful, but it releases it when it's warm and you really need each drop. But it's better than water because it's scraping the bedrock, and the water is white, full of silt, which is the best fertilizer that you can get for your crops. So you can see how like 1 billion people are actually living on these milky rivers that are coming from this frozen cow. But in the interview, the Dalai Lama said, don't ask me about glaciers. Iceland has much better glacial scientists to explain what is going to happen to glaciers in terms of global warming, because you've been researching them so long. So I went to the most distant person in the world, and he told me basically, go back and talk to your grandmother. So I went back to talk to them and into the research that has been gathered during the last 80 years. And we can see how the glaciers of Iceland are actually collapsing during this century. And this is nature leaving geological speed, entering human speed. And again, this is a paradigm shift. This is a completely different behavior of nature against us, against our time, and against our lives. So then the question is, what does 2160 mean? What is the meaning of 2160? So I take my daughter to my grandmother's house. Sorry about all this grandmother stuff. And we calculate, when do you become as old as grandmother? And my daughter does the calculation, and she can't believe the result. It's like 2104. And it's like, yes, imagine in 2104, you might be sitting in this same kitchen, and somebody comes to visit you, maybe not even somebody as young as you, maybe somebody 24 years old or something, like somebody born 2080. When is that person remembering you, somebody that you really influenced, somebody that you've known from infant until being like a mature human being? When is that person still talking about you as her greatest influence in life? And if that person, for example, becomes 90, and my daughter does the calculation, oh my God, 2170. So my grandmother whispers a secret to my daughter, something that I will never know, and she promises to keep that secret, something from the 1930s, keep that secret until 2100, and promises to tell that secret to that person and ask that person to keep the secret until 2170. So this is basically the handshake of generations, because our time is the time of the people that we know and love, the time that creates us, versus the time of the people that we will know and love, the time that we create. So my daughter will be able to touch almost 250 years with her bare hands. So only in the life of my own son, because he was helping artist Ólafur Elíasson to recreate a glacial series that he did in the year 1999. So in 2019, my son was helping the artist to find the glaciers again. And this is what has happened to the glaciers, not in the life of my grandmother, but in the life of my own child. And these are changes that you would normally have seen not during one lifetime, or 3 lifetimes, or 5 generations, but this is happening within the life of a child of mine. So I got the strange opportunity to write this plaque for Ok Glacier, which was the first glacier that Iceland loses to climate change. And I wrote, Ok is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, 415 ppm of CO2. So anybody can calculate when is someone still alive that you will love. Wonder what do we not understand that we know for sure will be understood. We don't have 100 years to understand, like in democracy or other issues. This is an issue that we have to understand much faster than previous issues. But this also means that we're in a paradigm shift. There's a new center goal to almost everything, and that goes to science, education, politics, law. So if a young person that is doing something today, learning something, it means that every single job is dominated by this new paradigm. So if you become a lawyer, it's a legal issue. If you become an engineer, it's an engineering challenge. If you become a politician, it's the greatest challenge of politics of our time. If you become a farmer, it's about farming. If you go into fashion, if you go into construction or architecture, that is, every single occupation needs to be rethought and redesigned according to when somebody is still alive that you will love. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andri. I can't help. We should welcome the panel up, by the way. But when they enter the stage, how do you consider then urgency? Because we are in a state of urgency. How do you cope with that?
I moved my profession, you could say, into this direction. That is, I could be writing a crime novel, but I decided, okay, if I have this talent, what can I offer with my talent? So this is what I thought I could offer. And so I feel like if I'm active and I feel like I'm doing something, and of course you never feel like you're doing enough. So, but I've been talking to students and business people and very actively the last years, hoping to help us to understand that we don't understand, and that will lead to understanding. Yeah.